The NFL preview series continues, and it's with special guest ClevTA. We'll call him TA for this purposes. Does a lot of unbelievably good stuff with season previews, analytical stuff, right up my alley. So I thought this would be perfect to talk about a team. Boy, what a tough division that they're housed in. The AFC North division is brutal. TA, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I know this team very well. Obviously, I've been rooting for them my whole life. And even though I try to be an unbiased observer, I think I am analyst. In my heart, I am still a fan. But I'm, glad to discuss this team. It's a very intriguing team, and obviously, there's a lot of personnel issues off the field the last couple of years, which made it even more intriguing. But yeah, it's an interesting team.
Still paying the price, maybe finally finished payment for the Deshaun Watson trade. But Cleveland, I mean, to their credit, what a great season, 11 wins last year. At the end of last year, how did you feel about where they stood? I know it ended poorly. I mean, a blowout to the upstart Houston Texans. But what were your feelings this past January with this team?
Yeah, honestly, with Joe Flacco as your quarterback coming off of the off his couch to lead the final charge into the playoffs, you never really thought that they weren't really a Super Bowl contender. Let's be honest. Once Deshaun Watson went down, even though they had a great defense, number one ranked defense by all the advanced metrics, EPA, et cetera, they just didn't have enough on offense at quarterback, and no Nick Chubb. And it was just one of those things between all those injuries and the wear and tear. I just didn't really have a good feeling that they were going to advance very far, but it was fun to get a taste of the playoffs. And, I think what we saw was this team really does have a high floor, because if you look at their roster, just really at the premium positions, to be honest, they're loaded. They're probably top five, top to bottom in the NFL. And so even when you go through the four quarterbacks that they went through last year, and like I said, plucking Joe Flacco off the street, off his couch, and he steps right in, and they can make that run at the end of the season and make the playoffs. It just shows the level of how good this roster is and how deep it is, and good coaching staff too. I mean, I think it's a really smart staff. They go for it on fourth down and go for two when they're supposed to. They do all the things that I think anyone who has any sort of, analytics background, or just, enjoys kind of odds, probabilities, numbers, all those sorts of things. They do the things that you want them to do. And so I think all of that adds to the win probability. And, they were really good in close games. And, it's one of those teams that, and we'll talk about, I'm sure, like they were extremely lucky, if you want to call it that, in some regards, but then also the opposite, really unlucky in some others. So it was a very interesting season from a, do you think there's going to be some regression here or not? Because you can make the case either way. But I think from a roster standpoint, they are definitely roster and coaching one of the top 10 in the NFL.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Housed in a division that drafts very well and has deep rosters, Baltimore, Cincinnati, etc. A lot of these teams could just waltz through and win other divisions. One area that I see that they can improve on, you mentioned the close games, that could be problematic. We could talk about that. But they threw, I believe, 24 interceptions last year. I mean, Flacco was a lot of risk and a lot of reward. And like you said, they took a lot of chances. They didn't sit on the ball. They went on fourth down. It'll be interesting to see if they could cut down on those interceptions. It might bode well.
Yeah, they were actually, if you look at, EPA, expected points added. And so essentially that measures the impact of such a points lost by turnovers. Their offense was dead last. They gave up the most expected points in the NFL, which is incredible for a team that made the playoffs like that and did it pretty easily. Didn't even have to play their starters in week 18. So, between that and the fact that Joe Flacco, when he came in, the one thing he did do very well is he pushed the ball down the field, and he created a lot of explosive plays. And so that was something that they were missing earlier in the season. With Deshaun Watson, he was missing on a lot of those deep throws, just didn't have the connection with his receivers. And then obviously the backups, PJ Walker and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, never took shots downfield. And so that was one thing they were really missing from their offense, was that explosive play. And Nick Chubb, would supply that in the run game, the rare running back who really does add impact and value, because he can create, he creates 10, 15 yards like pretty easily himself, which you don't see very often. And so when you don't have that, and you're down to your 4-string quarterback, the fact that he was able to get the ball down the field was something I think Kevin Stefanski and that offense really needed and he really liked. But it also led to a lot of high risk plays. Not only there was 2 pick sixes in the Houston wildcard game, which obviously were very costly, but he had other pick sixes and turnovers that led to touchdowns, even down the stretch in games that they won. The game against the Jets, if you recall, it was a Thursday night game. They blew him out, but there was I think it was a fumble six or a tip ball that was picked off and returned for a touchdown. And there was another one. Like he was constantly putting the ball in harm's way. So as much as the fans here really, he was kind of a folk hero for getting them to the playoffs down the stretch and creating those big plays, he also was creating a lot of turnovers. And I don't think that is really sustainable, honestly, going forward. I think that's why the front office was okay to let him go. Yeah. And the funny thing is they replaced him with a guy in Jameis Winston who's very similar. He's a version of Joe Flacco, to be honest. So, so like I said, I think that those turnovers are things you hope will regress, especially if you get Deshaun Watson, knock on wood, for a full season. Those aren't things that he typically, he's not a huge turnover guy on the interceptions side of things. But so you would hope that those kind of regress a little bit and you get a little bit more normalization on the impact of those turnovers on offense.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. Before we get to this year's draft and kind of go over what they did or didn't do, I want to talk about linebacker, because they swapped out linebackers. They have Hicks and Bush. Devin Bush has had a pretty good career. They lose Anthony Walker. They lose Taki. So it's kind of a 2 for 2. Slight net gain, maybe. I don't know. What are your feelings?
Yeah, I would say it's a wash. The thing with the Browns and a lot of these analytically focused front offices, the Eagles being similar, is they don't value linebacker as much as maybe some other teams. They kind of look at them as the running back of the defense. So the way they have not committed a lot of money or really a lot of draft capital. JOK really is the closest thing you get to that, but he's kind of a unique hybrid linebacker safety. And he's very, very unique in his skill set. Can cover. He's one of the best coverage linebackers you probably ever see coming out of college at Notre Dame. But they don't really think that that's a position that is too impactful. So they're not spending a lot of resources there. So I think Jordan Hicks is kind of amongst those 4 names that you mentioned. He's the best linebacker they've had probably in a while in terms of pedigree. He's been doing it for a while. He's a really, really solid player. He's good in coverage. I think when they go after linebackers, they want them to want to have one high level skill set, either be really good in coverage or really solid tackling. And that's how they look at free agency. That's how they look at the draft when it comes to linebacker. And, with Hicks, he's a good coverage linebacker, is very reliable. He's the quarterback of the defense, a good locker room guy. And then with Bush, Bush has been a major disappointment coming out of Michigan the last handful of years. He actually has been a really, really reliable tackler. If you look at some of the missed tackle rates from PFF, he was top 10 in the NFL amongst all linebackers in lowest missed tackle rate, but he's not a good coverage guy. So they got him for peanuts. So he's a guy that at least they figure, all right, we can complement the skill set of Hicks with a guy who we know is going to make the tackles that are there. He's not going to do too much more other than kind of hopefully be in the right place and make the tackle when it's there. And, you just hope that you're, elite level pass rush with Myles Garrett, et cetera. And, 3 really good corners in the back end are going to be so impactful that the linebackers aren't going to be needed as much. So I'll call it a wash at the end of the day, but I don't think it's too much of an impact either way.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that Cleveland's kind of been devaluing the linebacker core. And I know other teams do that. Linebackers not sexy, especially in the middle. If 2 down linebackers, 2 down anything really isn't sexy anymore. It's kind of my pet peeve with them that they haven't really addressed linebacker, but I understand it based on what you said because they have strengths in a lot of other positions. up here you see my top needs. And to your point about this deep roster, I didn't have as many top needs for Cleveland as I did for most other teams. They don't have a lot of top needs. I'm concerned, since Watson's been back from his suspension, that his internal clock isn't where it used to be, or at least that's how I perceive it. So I kind of wanted them to address that by getting some pass blocking offensive linemen. And I know they drafted late, obviously, because of Watson. They didn't draft until the 54th pick. But TA, walk us through what they did accomplish in the draft and your feelings.
Yeah, again, not a lot of high capital picks, so there's not much they can do. They traded 2 of the picks for Jerry Jeudy, which I thought was a big need. Obviously, that second wide receiver to Amari Cooper. So to me, that counts, as kind of this part of this draft class, for me. So, and I thought they could have used another kind of deep threat at receiver that just wasn't. It just didn't fall that way. A lot of the top receivers went early. There was a lot of them. So, they didn't go that route. But anyone who follows me on Twitter knew I was banging the drum for Michael Hall weeks, prior to the draft. And, to get him there, I thought was a really, really nice get. First of all, it fits exactly what Andrew Berry and this front office likes to get from high draft, drafted players. It's got to be a premium position. Typically, it's a young player under the age of, 22. And a highly athletic player. And so Michael Hall fits all that from Ohio State. He, pass rushing defensive tackle, with the way these guys are getting paid. We saw in this offseason, they're all getting paid. It's become a premium position. It's essentially like a pass rusher. So, Hall comes in, he's under 21. If you look at some of his underlying metrics, he led, he was number 1 amongst all defensive tackles in this draft in quick pressure rate. So he was getting to the quarterback at the fastest rate of any defensive tackle in college football, which tells me more. Like, that is, as important as, anything else. Like, sacks are a little bit fickle. Some of it is dependent, or a lot of it is dependent on the quarterback. So the fact that he can get to the quarterback quickly, he's very athletic, he's very young. I think these are all things that they love to see. And he's not needed to play right away. Like, he is going to be part of a very, very deep rotation at defensive tackle, but he's got that high upside. So I love that pick. Zinter is a guy who got a lot of pub at Michigan. I know you mentioned that you would have liked to have seen a pass blocking offensive lineman, maybe a tackle. DeJuan Jones was a great pick for them last year in the mid rounds. He's a starter. He's one of the best young tackles in the NFL. You get Jack Conklin back. Who knows if he can, how much he has left. And then you've got Jed Wills at left tackle. Like, I think they're okay. They actually signed a handful of veterans in the last few weeks, which, guys that, have played a lot of snaps in the NFL. They have a really good 2 deep offensive line. And Zinter comes in at guard. He, broke his leg at the end of the year against Ohio State. Ironically, Michael Hall's the one who fell on him in that Michigan-Ohio State game. But he's a guy that, has a very good pedigree. Everyone loves in the locker room as a leader. I thought that was fine. I don't love taking guards that high, but, Joel Bitonio's getting older. Supposedly there's talk of him, retire. He could have retired this year. He might retire next year. So I think in terms of a succession plan, he and Wyatt Teller has also been really good. He's got a high price tag. He might be a guy that could get cut next year to save on the cap space. So drafting a guy like Zinter wasn't bad. Thrash is kind of, you're talking about 5th round receivers. And after that, guys like Nathaniel Watson from Mississippi State, he was SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I don't think many people realize that. He was, looking at some of his numbers, he led the SEC in tackles at linebacker. He had some off the field issues. And, athletically, maybe wasn't as coveted as some other guys, but that's an intriguing guy who could play special teams. And, if he figures things out, could be a late round gem. So I guess with the amount of capital that they had in the draft, and the fact that they also get Jerry Jeudy and is kind of this class, part of this class, I thought they did fine overall. I don't think they don't have a lot of roster room anyway, but I think they did fine with who they acquired.
Yeah, and just to let you and everybody know, when somebody like Jerry Jeudy is acquired for a draft pick, he definitely counts in my draft grade, because it's a pick or in this case, 2 picks they would have made. And so Jerry Jeudy represents those 2 picks. So he definitely counts in my draft grade. Looking at their uncommon opponents, the teams that Pittsburgh Cincinnati, Baltimore do not play. It's Jacksonville, Miami, and the Saints. And they're all kind of similar teams in terms of they're all playoff contenders. Obviously, Miami made the playoffs last year, dynamite offense. The Saints came close, Jacksonville came close, and Cleveland's right in that ballpark. Given that schedule, looking at their season win total, which is roughly 8.5, if you look at consensus, maybe slanted a little bit to the over, -135 or so. How do you see this shaking out? Would you have any recommendation? What do you think, schedule versus season wins?
Yeah, I wrote about it last year in my preview, and to be honest, I haven't bet anything yet from my season win total. I actually look at, I like looking at alternative win totals.
Okay.
Surprisingly, I think people would be surprised to see how often these win totals are off by multiple games. It happens way more often than we think, especially when you're looking at the kind of the middle tier, kind of that 5 to 9 win team. You get a lot of, like, when they go over by multiple games. And so, I think looking at some of those alternatives, or just looking at the division, I think they're, what did I see? Like maybe 6-1 somewhere.
6-1 at DraftKings, correct?
Yeah, I think 6-1. I think Baltimore's taken a step back, and I think Cincinnati's got, between the Burrow, coming back from injury, and who knows what's going on with, T. Higgins and Hendrickson, and the offensive line continues to be kind of mediocre. I think that there's definitely a path for the Browns to win the division. So, taking a bite out of +600 isn't a bad idea. I just think with the schedule, they faced the top 5 schedule last year. They weren't expected to, but it ended up being a really good schedule. Right. And so we saw, like, I think I mentioned this earlier, I think this team has a really high floor just because the roster is so good, top to bottom. They really don't have many holes. Last year, their quarterback play, they went through 4 quarterbacks, had the 28th ranked kind of aggregate quarterback ranking when you look at EPA per dropback amongst the 32 NFL teams, and they won 11 games. I went back because I was curious how often that happens, because the quarterback drives wins just so often and is so heavily correlated. So how often do you have a team kind of this bad at the quarterback position, win double-digit games? And going back to 2000, there's only 2 other temes that had a worse quarterback EPA ranking than they did, and won double-digit games. Only, I'm trying to think. I had it here. Oh, only the 05 Bears. They ranked 31st in quarterback EPA. Won 11 games, and they were worse. That was the only one. Only 18 teams like the Browns ranked bottom 10 in EPA per dropback and won double digits. And that's out of 261 teams that won double-digit games since 2000. So you're talking about a rarity. And that shows me that this team has a really high floor because the rest of the roster is so good. They can make up for poor quarterback play. And they did that last year against a really tough schedule. So I think with this team, even if Deshaun Watson, is not back to his old self, like, I think all you really need for them to win this division and compete for at least a wild card spot and go over this win total is he only has to play in kind of that 18 to 20 range when it comes to quarterback. I know that the defense is going to take a step back. We know that historically defensive performance is a little bit volatile. So they're likely not going to be the number 1 ranked team again on defense like they were last year. But even if they're in that, closer to 10th range, 8 to 10 range as well, I think that this is, good enough roster that they can, they can win the 9-10 games and at least have a shot at the division. And any sort of upside from Deshaun Watson, if he is back, if Jerry Jeudy really fills that need, if the injuries regress. I mean, they were the 4th most injured team in the NFL when you look at adjusted games lost from the old Football Outsiders metric. So, like, they, hopefully you get some little injury regression, you get some turnover regression on offense, you get a little better quarterback play overall. So even if you have a drop off in the defense, I think double-digit wins is very doable, just because the rest of the roster and the coaching staff is that good.
I like your comment about alternate win totals. It does come into play with a number of teams, and it's an area that shop to shop, you can get some variance. So I think people who watch this, keep in mind alternate win totals, because if your team's going to go over or a team's going to go under, it may go way under or way over, like Seattle a couple years ago, Houston last year, Cleveland even last year. So excellent point there. This is my final thought slide, and I want to focus on the second one, the home road splits, because I look back and they allowed roughly 14 points per game at home. I know weather's an issue a lot of times because of you live in Cleveland, you know that
Oh yeah.
it can be crazy with the weather. So part of that is weather, but then we're talking 30 points per game, almost 30 points per game during the regular season allowed on the road, and then 45 to Houston. Is there anything there, or is it just random because the sample size is only 8 and 9 games, or what do you see there in terms of the home road splits?
Yeah, it's
You know, I might have lost you there. There you are.
It's an interesting question. You know, there's there's a big wind and rain impact potentially. You know, when you get into certain parts of and snow impact, when you get to certain parts of the year, you get, you know, just these. And so I'm sorry, Ron, can you hear me? I think you lost me for a minute.
Yeah, it's still a little bit choppy, unfortunately, but I did hear some of it.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I think it's a combination of, you know, they got some breaks from the weather when they played San Francisco and they played Jacksonville. I think they played the Bears. It was all like, it was very windy and wet, you know, a wet day. So they got advantage there. They were lucky in that they faced Joe Burrow in the opener right off that calf injury. He was not 100% at all. And that actually, there was some wind and rain in that game too. They faced Trevor Lawrence off of a high ankle sprain on Monday night. So it was a short week with a high ankle sprain. So they got lucky, and they faced Clayton Tune in his only start with Arizona at home. So those, you know, they caught some breaks with the quarterbacks that they were facing, but the defense, you know, they feed off that home crowd, and it's a very aggressive defense. Yeah. And so I think the home crowd and the home weather helped. And then, you know, on the road, I did notice one thing that with this team and this Jim Schwartz defense is, like I said, they're very aggressive. They are attacking up the field a lot, which is great if you can do it against an overmatched line and quarterback, but against the really smart coordinators and NFL offensive coaches and good quarterbacks on the road, you can use that aggression to your advantage. And so what I saw was against Indianapolis, Shane Steichen, against the Rams and Sean McVay, especially those two teams, really they countered all that aggression with a lot of RPOs, with a lot of misdirections, with screen passes, a lot of things. I mean, Sean McVay was telling Matt Stafford to, like, when he got into the huddle, like, snap it as quickly as possible so the defense can't get ready. Like, they were doing these little things to really take some of that aggression advantage away from the Browns. So, and they gave up some big games in that regard. Bobby Slowick did the same thing in Houston. So it was they were missing tackles on the road. They were allowing explosive plays way more often on the road than they were at home. And it's just, I think the defense was just, the mentality was always attack, and aggression. And they just got caught more often on the road than not. And they played better quarterbacks in better weather conditions, et cetera, and faced, you know, better offensive coaches, I think, on the road. I think it was all of that kind of combined. I mean, I don't think there's like one direct answer. I don't even know if my answer is correct. It's just something I've noticed more often. And that's something that, you know, I think I don't think they're necessarily the best defense in the NFL. I think that was a little bit of a mirage, but they were definitely, you know, one of the 5 best defenses. And it just so happened, because of some of those advantages with the weather and the quarterback injuries, that they were able to take advantage and you know, really load up the stat line.
Yeah, every game matters with this division. having an edge, tiebreakers for sure between Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore. That's going to really come into play. And I'm going to be watching the home road splits, and I'm going to be watching Watson to see, how can he put together a whole full season? Can he get back to his old form? TA, any closing thoughts as we wrap up these 20 plus minutes on Cleveland?
No, I like I said, I think that it's an interesting team. I mean, if Deshaun Watson ever can get back to his top 10 level form, I mean, this is clearly a Super Bowl contender because they've got, they're pretty loaded everywhere else. But I do think that with that, with the loaded roster, good coaching staff, and just the ability to overcome quarterback deficiencies. I do think that their floor is pretty high, and I think Jameis Winston is a really good quality backup if you're going to be stuck with someone who has to play part of the season. You could do a lot worse than Jameis Winston, and he's kind of Joe Flacco, younger Joe Flacco. So I think they can recreate some of that down the field magic if they really had to in a pinch. And so I think they're set up pretty well for at least a 500 season. But I think this is a 10-win team at the end of the day, assuming some regression from the turnovers and the injuries. And I think it's tough division, but they're going to be entertaining, and there's going to be a lot of coin flip level games. And yeah, we'll see what happens. But very interesting team.
Well, what comes up must come down. If Cleveland goes up, somebody in that division is going to have to go down. I think a couple more teams, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, to preview down the road. Once again, thanks, TA, for your contributions. Definitely, if you're not following TA, I'm sure you are. You've got lots of followers. You do fantastic work. Can't wait to see your season previews come out. Thanks to everybody who's watching, and we'll be back again tomorrow, I believe, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So stay tuned for another quick recap, team by team, with the NFL. Thank you.
Thanks.